Interventionist is one of the ways the United States foreign policy towards West Asia can be described. Through a series of coercive measures, the U.S. has repeatedly tried to achieve its strategic goals regardless of the preferences of the regional actors. Now, by undermining the sovereignty of the West Asian countries, Washington has jeopardized the regional stability and security on many occasions. Hi, welcome to Decision 2020. I'm Kavit Atway. This is a program centered on the U.S. 2020 presidential elections. In this episode of the program, we will discuss U.S. foreign policies in the West Asia and its relations with its closest ally, Israel. And we will look at the other contenders and candidates, namely third-party candidates and independents that are running for the highest office in the U.S. Why? Because their voices need to be heard.
The U.S. has vital interests in the West Asian region, where it has exercised aggressive policies to expand its sphere of influence. A large number of West Asian countries have long lived under a shadow of direct U.S. involvement in their internal affairs, and Washington has even waged war on a sheer list of the countries in the region. After the 9/11 attacks, under the pretext of a so-called war on terror, the U.S. increased its regional presence through a large number of military forces and covert operations. That continued presence has had destabilizing consequences, reflecting the willingness of U.S. administrations to bear the financial and human costs of these atrocities at the expense of reifying their strategic primacy.
Now, let's hear what some of the officials think about the continued presence of the U.S. in this region.
Basically regard the presence of foreign forces, particularly U.S. troops in our region, as a source of tension, instability, and insecurity. Their presence is illegitimate and illegal. This is our region. If our armed forces are supposed to conduct their patrols, they should be able to do this in tranquility and with peace of mind.
We're facing aggressive and dangerous U.S. policies. This behavior won't stop simply by issuing statements. We're witnessing massive U.S. military presence in Iraq, and that threatens our security.
Well, to understand Washington's real strategy behind its presence in West Asia, let's bring in our guest, Keith Harmon Snow. He's a war correspondent and former genocide investigator for UNICEF. Hello, Keith. Welcome to Decision 2020.
Thanks for having me.
Let me first start out with the question where the U.S. President Donald Trump has made a campaign promise to end the endless wars and draw down troops, like in Afghanistan. But it's really not what he's doing. For example, he's drawing down troops in Afghanistan to 2,500 only. Not a total withdrawal, and he's moving troops around, like from Iraq to Syria. Democratic presidential nominee, meanwhile, Joe Biden, on the other hand, says he's intending to stay in West Asia, but in smaller numbers. Are they both saying the same thing?
The whole idea of, elections choice, the election system in the United States is a completely corrupt fraud, first of all. To vote is to uphold a system of destruction. To vote is to uphold a power structure that is destroying the planet. And there's very little difference between Joe Biden on the one hand and Donald Trump on the other. You can look at their specific policies. You can look at the fact that they're both extreme narcissists. They're both, extremely sexist, extremely racist, imperialist, pathological liars. And, Joe Biden doesn't even have anything upstairs. It's not even going to be Joe Biden running the show. It's going to be this black woman, Kamala Harris, who is the antithesis to freedom and justice and truth for people of color in the United States or around the world. So when it comes to Iran, their policies, as I said earlier, their policies are going to be the same. It's going to be a militant, destroy, destabilize Iran at any cost. That's the way I see both of those guys in power.
Okay, Keith, we're going to get back to you a little later on in the program. Now, when we take a look at how the troop drawdown is being presented, again, Donald Trump has made a promise to end these endless wars, but the troop drawdown is not really down to zero. I mean, for example, in Afghanistan, it's down to 2,500. I mentioned that. And then he's moving troops around like from Iraq to Syria. Meanwhile, the real problems of Americans are not really being addressed. Enter the third-party candidates, like Howie Hawkins from the Green Party.
With the two major party candidates bought and paid for by Wall Street, our campaign will deliver. This campaign is powered by the grassroots. Our campaign will gladly carry the mantle of the working class that Joe Biden and the Democrats have just tossed aside.
Or how about Joe Jorgensen from the Libertarian Party? Real people on the ballots, by the way, discussing real problems, voices that need to be heard. Now back to the U.S. policies in West Asia. Washington always needs to vilify a Western Asian country to advance its key interests in the region.
The phrase America First has been a major feature of Donald Trump's foreign policy rhetoric, a slogan under which Trump has cast doubt on a group of multilateral alliances and international treaties. In 2018, the U.S. president faced global criticism for announcing his decision to withdraw from Iran's nuclear deal. That move was followed by the reinstallation of economic sanctions against Iran, justified under the false excuse of Tehran's regional threats, a justification that was never proven credible. However, despite Saudi Arabia's records of human rights and domestic oppression, Washington didn't hesitate to sign an arms deal with Riyadh in 2017.
And that shows that the U.S. applies obvious double standards in conducting its West Asia diplomacy. Okay, now it's time to take a look at social media posts and what has been said about Washington's diplomatic discrepancies. First tweets by Michael Hanna. For the Trump administration, the preference or views of Saudi, UAE, Israel, and the JCPOA take precedence over those of UK, France, and Germany. Okay, that's understandable. Tom Rass, however, writes, read all my tweets, see that I am criticizing Saudi Arabia and USA simultaneously. U.S. for having double standards and hypocrisy. Well, that's something that the U.S. has displayed, especially when it comes to Iran. Well, when we talk about West Asia, Iran is in the front, right, and center. Trump has repeatedly said that he is open to a deal with Tehran. Well, on the other hand, he keeps on threatening Iran militarily, going as far as assassinating the country's top commander, General Qasem Soleimani. So what's the main policy that the current administration is after? Well, we have Keith Harmon Snow with us, again, a war correspondent and former genocide investigator for UNICEF. Okay, so let's talk about Iran, Keith. At this point, this is something that has been on the top of the list for Trump administration and a lot of his co-workers, if you want to call them that. What is exactly the deal when it comes to the U.S. and what it wants to do with Iran? Is it something that they are willing to compromise on, do a deal with, or do they want to go to war with Iran? What do you think that is?
It's hard to say whether Donald Trump actually has a policy. But if there is a policy in place with respect to Iran, you know, the United States policy on Iran is the same United States policy on Iran as we have had on countries like Yemen and Sudan and Libya. So we attacked and destroyed Libya. We have done everything we can to attack and destroy Sudan. Yemen is at war. And Iran is right up there at the top right now in terms of countries the United States wants to destabilize and basically overthrow.
Okay, that's Keith Harmon Snow, a war correspondent and a former genocide investigator for UNICEF, and his thoughts there. While Washington follows this bellicose and aggressive approach against Tehran, like you just heard there from Keith Harmon Snow, it is at the same time trying to consolidate its regional presence through strengthening its network of alliances.
Decades of failed interventionism have proved that Washington can no longer achieve the strategic goals through militarism. Now, the U.S. is seemingly willing to redistribute its presence through greater reliance upon its strategic allies in the region. By pushing ahead with its efforts to create an alliance of Arab states, it would also appreciate creating a potential goldmine for the American military-industrial complex and arms exporters. That will also contribute to its long-standing mutual strategic goals with Israel, which is the desire to replace certain regional governments with pro-Western puppet regimes that would protect their interests in West Asia. However, one must wait and see if a potential shift in the U.S. administration will affect these policies.
Person who feels like, black people don't matter out here because, look, we're fighting for black lives every single day and we still get treated like we're animals out here because we need Trump out the office right now. So we have to settle for Biden, even though we don't, agree with his tactics either, but he's the lesser evil than Trump's. It's, I would guess, the lesser of two evils. I'm not 100% with what we have with the Democratic Party, but I'm definitely not, I'm 1,000% away from what we have right now.
Let's take a moment to look at the recent vice presidential debates. There were some highlights worth mentioning. We made a list. Topping this list would be how VP Pence evaded the question on the peaceful transfer of power. As a matter of fact, more often than not, he practically changed the subject every time he was asked a tough question. The VP candidate, Harris, attacked Trump for transparency both on his health and his taxes. An exchange about Breonna Taylor and George Floyd showed their opposing views on racial justice. But the biggest highlight of the night was...
The reality of this is that we are talking about an election in 27 days.
Okay, well, maybe in some ways it wasn't the biggest highlight. Anyways, there are some of the issues that need to be discussed. Third-party candidates and independents, they're the ones that have raised some important issues here.
The world we live in today is not inclusive. It is not designed to include everyone. I believe that technology is enabling a new age, a new era for humanity.
Brock to vote at Brock.vote.
Let's get something straight. President Trump, that's a low bar. We can't simply vote for someone because they're not him. That's not enough. We'll see a new possibility that points in a new direction. That's why I'm running, and that's who I'm running for.
Addressing income inequality, providing better care for our military, veterans, and their families, and reforming immigration. With support from the Alliance Party, together we can fix the broken two-party gridlock. Roque de la Fuente, the son of immigrants.
Eleanor Goldfield, creative artist and activist, now joins us to tell us about what she feels is important in this election. She has with her Nick Brana, founder of the Movement for People's Party and former National Political Outreach Coordinator, Bernie 2016.
So let's start off firstly. I mean, you have personal experience within the two-party system. So talk about like this issue of the two-party system. I mean, if we could really even call it a two-party system.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. You cannot, it doesn't even qualify as really a two-party system as Noam Chomsky and Gore Vidal and so many others have pointed out. It really is just a one-party state, the business party here in the United States. You have two political parties that essentially take corporate money from the same corporations, the same billionaires. They have lobbyists from the same corporations on their national committees. So, when you have that kind of similarity, you really can't call them distinct What we have in the United States is we don't even have political parties necessarily. We have committees of corporations.
And you've seen this, like a lot of us see this from the outside, but you have kind of a unique perspective of seeing it from the inside and then trying to build something on the outside. Talk about like how you tried. I mean, I imagine like at first you're like, oh, we can do good things from the inside. How did that pan out?
It's true. I did have to learn the hard way. Like so many Americans, obviously, we have confidence. You know, we give our political system the benefit of the doubt. You know, when we start working in politics or when we go to vote. You know, and so I had to. I worked with the Democrats on a number of campaigns. John Kerry, Terry McAuliffe, who was governor of Virginia, and you know, and really kind of lost confidence because I saw how corporate it was. And how it was not distinct from the Republican Party, you know, in that way. And so my last campaign was the Bernie campaign in 2016, where I was the national political outreach coordinator. I did outreach to the superdelegates for Bernie and helped him found Our Revolution afterwards. And that was the last straw. That view into the party's national committee and how bought off it was told me that really we needed to do now what the majority of Americans are calling for. Just a couple weeks ago, there was a poll that shows that it's kind of climbed to a new record high of 60% of Americans who want a major new party, including 2/3 of Biden's voters, or people who say they're going to vote for him.
That's a little embarrassing. And I know that one of the things that you've brought up in the past is how many people, and for those who don't know, when you go to register to vote in the United States, you can choose Democrat, Republican, or Independent. And I mean, one of the things that you pointed out before is how many people choose Independent these days.
Yeah, it's true. Over the last 15 years there's been this phenomenon where the Democratic and the Republican parties have essentially been dissolving into independent status. So millions of people have left both parties, tens of millions. They've disaffiliated with the parties. They've, you know, physically switched their registration, like you're saying. An even bigger phenomenon is that they've switched their self-identification.
Wow. Well, that will definitely be an exciting trajectory to watch, and as you pointed out, incredibly desired and demanded by the people on the ground. So thank you so much for joining us, Nick. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Awesome.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by, but I'll tell you what.
He said stand back, and then just yesterday when he was asked, he said specifically stand down, a synonym with stand back, and the president said sure when asked by the moderator whether they should stand down.
All right, let's hear more about the impacts of pro-Israeli lobbies on directing American policies. Let's bring in Alison Weir. She's an American activist and writer who's known for her interest in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, founder and executive director of the nonprofit organization If Americans Knew. Hi, Alison. Welcome to Decision 2020.
Thank you. I'm glad to be on it.
Great to have you. As we already discussed, Israel's support is vital in the U.S. presidential elections. I'm sure you'll agree. And that is very much dependent on the candidate's relationship with the strongest Israeli lobby in the U.S. AIPAC. Now, how detrimental can AIPAC be in getting a candidate selected, do you think?
AIPAC is very powerful in the United States. It's certainly the most powerful organization on behalf of a foreign country in the United States. It's extremely influential in both parties, and it's also influential because it's just part of the larger Israel lobby that has many entities that advocate for Israel and are very influential in the Democratic Party and in the Republican Party. On top of that, there are many donors that are pro-Israel, such as Haim Saban for the Democrats and Sheldon Adelson for the Republicans, who also largely run the policies that ambitious politicians in America will endorse.
Okay, great. Alison there. We're going to talk with her again. Now, going back to diplomacy, we already mentioned that Israel has long advocated for influencing U.S. foreign policy against Iran. In terms of the way that the U.S.-Israeli relations impact America's interaction with other nations is the subject of our next report.
AIPAC annual lobbying expenditure tops hundreds of thousands of dollars, it is not surprising that pro-Israeli policies are overwhelmingly apparent in Washington's foreign policy. A series of controversial initiatives by the latest U.S. administration proves that the Israeli lobbies are still being staunchly supported by the U.S. presidents. In recent years, Washington has recognized Jerusalem al-Quds as the Israeli capital and has shuttered the Palestinian. It has brokered normalization deals between certain Arab countries and the occupying regime and continues to support the much-condemned so-called Middle East peace plan. In other words, Washington's commitment to Tel Aviv is nothing but approval for the regime's violation of well-established legal and ethical standards, a growing support for the further occupation of Palestinian territories in the face of unprecedented violations of human rights and international law, and in total contradiction to their stated goals of promoting peace and stability.
When in 2019 a group of American politicians refused to attend the Israeli lobby's annual conference, well, Donald Trump accused them of anti-Semitism, an accusation that can be very harmful to someone who is living in American society. Well, let's go back to our guest, Alison Weir, to discuss the potential consequences of opposing Israeli values in the U.S. Alison, what we have here is Ilhan Omar, the Minnesota representative, reportedly calling anti-Semitic statements against the Israeli regime facing backlash from a group of American officials and politicians. Why can anti-Israel rhetoric be so consequential in the U.S. and so severely looked at when it comes to making statements on Israel?
Well, for many decades, Israel partisans will call anyone who speaks out about Palestinian rights anti-Semitic. This is a strategy that they've used for many years. When Ilhan Omar and other people have spoken about the Israel lobby, they're even more called anti-Semitic for this, even though that's not the case.
Okay, that was Alison Weir there talking to us. We do appreciate her comments. She is the American activist and writer known for interest in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So there's a huge difference between American political parties in their view of Tel Aviv. Well, let's find out. I mean, is there going to be a radical shift in the nature of the bilateral ties between the two sides in the near future?
Despite occasional shifting views on Israel, support for Israel is as deep in the Democratic Party as it is among the Republicans. Since the beginning of the Cold War, Israel has served as the linchpin of American foreign policy. It is a frequent purchaser of major U.S. weapon systems and regularly seeks Washington's help to bolster its defense capabilities. The two sides' cooperation covers a number of other areas, including cyber issues, information sharing, energy, and trade. And the U.S. is Israel's largest trading partner, and Israeli political segments regularly emphasize the importance of close cooperation with the U.S. The regime's need for American economic and military assistance and Washington's desire for an active foreign policy instrument in West Asia have resulted in unjust practices against innocent people that we suffer every day. All these show that Washington cannot and would not change its bias favoring of the Israeli regime in the upcoming future.
No longer makes
And so I really do think that Biden represents all of us.
We can't continue another 4 more years with someone who's a racist, with someone who lies.
What makes up any society to be strong is the family core. And he stands for those family cores. And I like what he's doing with the Supreme Court.
And that does it for today. Don't forget to watch our next episode, which we're going to take a look at many different issues regarding the third-party candidates and the independents vis-a-vis the current president and, of course, the candidate Biden. I've been Kaveh Tarway on behalf of the whole team here. Thanks for watching Decision 2020.